After my divorce, I stayed with my brother Josh. Josh and I haven't been on speaking terms since I dated my now ex-wife Lisa. When we were in high school, Josh dated Mandy, Lisa's best friend. After a week of dating, someone started spreading rumors about Josh. Josh claimed that Lisa did it out of jealousy. Lisa wasn't happy with Mandy dating because she wanted to have her friend all to herself. Lisa, of course, denied everything. Since then, Josh and Mandy stopped communicating with Lisa and me. After school, my brother and I married our sweethearts and moved to different towns. After 5 years of marriage, Lisa found a new lover and divorced me. When the divorce was finalized, Lisa admitted that she was responsible for those rumors, but not for the reason Josh thought. The thing is, Lisa dated me because I had the best grades in class. In her mind, my success in school indicated that I would become rich and powerful in the future. But reality soon hit her after we got married. Despite finishing school as a valedictorian, I still had to start at an entry-level job. I guess Lisa ran out of patience because she ran off with some tycoon. And just when things couldn't get any worse, my house burned down due to faulty wiring. I was trying to find a place to stay when I got an unexpected call. It was from Josh. He said that Lisa was telling everyone on social media about the divorce and her new lover. I told Josh about how my house burned down. After hearing that, Josh offered to let me stay at his place for a while. I was surprised to have this sympathy from him. It seemed to me that Josh wanted to bury the hatchet. Before I could accept, I asked Josh if Mandy would mind. Josh said that Mandy left him 3 years prior for reasons similar to Lisa's. I figured that Josh was doing this out of sympathy, given that we've shared the same problem. But it wouldn't be until I moved to Josh's place that I learned the real reason why I was invited there. After putting my stuff in the guest bedroom, I had some beer with Josh in the living room. We were catching up when Josh told me about Baby Jim. Baby Jim was an old baby doll Josh kept in his room. My brother gave me one rule: leave Baby Jim and his stuff alone. Baby Jim was to be kept in his crib at all times, with his toys and bottle full of milk with him. I laughed at Josh's rule, thinking he was screwing with me, but then I saw how serious my brother looked. Josh led me to his room, where he showed me the crib. Sure enough, Baby Jim was in there, with toys and a bottle full of milk. The doll had golden hair and deep blue eyes that looked like they were staring right at me. It was swaddled in a white blanket, which seemed a little too tight for a real baby. I asked Josh why he had a baby doll to begin with. My brother told me that the doll was his responsibility as it came with the house. I decided to ignore this situation as I was too upset with my own problems to care. I rarely saw Josh, even when we were both in the house. Sometimes I'd pass by his room and hear whispers coming from it. I was getting a little worried about Josh. I was grateful for everything my brother had done for me, but caring for a doll as if it were a real child doesn't precisely define rationality. I used to chalk it up to some coping mechanism for the divorce. But one incident made me realize that there was more to this Baby Jim nonsense than I thought. I just returned from work when I got a text from Josh. His boss was having a birthday celebration after closing hours, and the whole department was going. Josh asked me to babysit Baby Jim until he got back. I rolled my eyes as Josh gave me some instructions. All I had to do was refill the baby bottle and make sure Baby Jim and his toys stayed in the crib. I didn't want to enable Josh's delusions, but I didn't want to risk destroying our relationship either. I entered Josh's room and approached Baby Jim's crib. The bottle next to the doll was empty, so I took it to the kitchen to refill it. I was heading back up the stairs when I heard a small thud. I headed in the direction where it came from and found myself back in Josh's room. I looked around and saw a picture lying on the floor in front of the dresser. I went to pick it up when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a baby crying enacted from Baby Jim's crib. I can't describe how I felt as I turned to the crib. I looked inside and saw that baby Jim, the doll, was crying. His skin was unnaturally pale, and the doll now looked like a real baby. Fangs began to protrude from the creature's mouth as it thrashed around in its blanket. I screamed as I bolted out of the house and down the sidewalk. Just as I turned to see if the monster was chasing me, I ran into one of the neighbors. He went off on me, asking what's the matter with me. He was about to grab me by the shirt when he noticed the baby bottle on the ground. I was so scared that I forgot I was holding it when I ran. The neighbor's anger quickly subsided, and he asked me where I came from. I told him that I was living with my brother and gave him the address. The neighbor went silent before telling me that I should move out. It turned out that the whole neighborhood knew of baby Jim and tried to avoid Josh's house. The house that my brother lived in had a dark history. A history that Josh either didn't know about or didn't believe in. Many years ago, a couple named Clay and Rebecca Masterson lived in that house. They'd been trying to have a baby for a long time. At some point, Clay decided to seek help from black magic. Without telling his wife, Clay consulted a warlock who agreed to help him. All he had to do was bring a baby doll to him. Clay brought a baby doll to the warlock the next day. It was the same one baby Jim was when I first saw him. The warlock casted a spell on the doll, which, according to him, would turn it into a real baby. Clay thanked the warlock before returning home with his future child. Rebecca was furious with her husband when he told her everything. But after some convincing, Rebecca agreed to go along with it. The spell did work, but not in the way the Mastersons expected. When the doll came to life, it took the hideous form I saw it in earlier. It ran around the house, wrecking everything and sometimes attacking the couple. Rebecca demanded that Clay get rid of the monstrosity. He, however, refused to do so as he loved baby Jim. It seemed that Clay's desperation for a child was so severe that he was willing to look past baby Jim's antics. Fed up, Rebecca packed her things and moved in with her brother. Clay didn't care so long as he had the child, if you would even call it that. Years passed, and Clay continued to care for baby Jim. But one fateful day, something went wrong and baby Jim killed Clay in his sleep. After that, whoever moved into that house had to care for baby Jim, just like Josh. This must have been the real reason why Mandy left my brother. I'm now living in a hotel until my house gets repaired. Josh never contacted me after that day. I tried to call him, but he never picked up. Josh probably felt guilty for dragging me into that mess. All I can do is hope that he escapes baby Jim before it's too late. I was never a fan of Valentine's Day. To me, the holiday is nothing but a collection of corny romance cliches. I guess this is why I've never had a serious relationship. I can't say that being single ever bothered me. If I'm being frank, I think I prefer to stay single for life. But just because I don't care for relationships doesn't mean that I judge others for being in them. Otherwise, my friend Isabella would never have invited me to her bachelorette party. Being from a wealthy family, Isabella could start this new chapter of her life wherever and however she pleased. She chose to have her bachelorette party and wedding in Rome. There are two reasons why Isabella chose here of all places. Before she was born, Isabella's grandparents immigrated from Rome to the US. For the first few years, the couple constantly struggled to make ends meet. But thanks to his hard work and discipline, Isabella's grandfather was able to climb the corporate ladder. By the time his son and daughter-in-law had Isabella, he became CEO of the company he worked in for so long. Isabella's grandfather passed away about a week into her engagement. Devastated, she decided to honor his memory by having her wedding in his hometown. Sort of a remember where you came from type of thing. The other reason involved Valentine's Day, which is her favorite holiday. It happened that the wedding was set the day after Valentine's Day that year. So she had this idea where if she and her future husband could get married on February 15th, they'd celebrate it every year as their second Valentine's Day. As cheesy as it sounded, I was happy for my friend and was delighted to be involved. Isabella wanted to do something adventurous for her bachelorette party. There was a cave near Palatine Hill with a fascinating history. This cave was home to a cult known as the Valentinos Clan a long time ago. The Valentinos Clan was a group that worshipped Lupercus, the Roman god of fertility. Like all pagans, they celebrated Lupercalia, the original version of Valentine's Day. From what I understand, it's a holiday about animal sacrifice, random hookups, and infertile women getting hit with goat hide because it's supposed to make them fertile. What made it crazier was that the women wanted to be hit with goat skin. The Valentinos clan followed the same traditions, but to a different extent. For example, they hit both men and women with goat skin, and after that, the blood-stained hide is burned as an offering to Lupercus. But the worst part was what happened to those who still couldn't reproduce afterward. If a couple fails to conceive after the rituals, the sterile partner is sacrificed to Lupercus. Apparently, being unable to procreate was considered a great shame to the Valentinos clan, so much so that the victims were willing to be sacrificed. This went on for years, until something happened in 247 AD. About 3 months after Lupercalia, the Valentinos clan learned that nobody had conceived. Even the members, who successfully procreated the year before, failed somehow. I'm sure that you can guess what happened after that. Nobody could understand how the entire cult of 50 people suddenly became infertile. Even modern medicine considers the odds as astronomical. They say that every year on Lupercalia, you can hear the Valentinos clan carrying out their yearly rituals in hopes of being able to procreate again. When Isabella told me this story, I asked if she believed that stuff. She took out her phone and showed me a picture of the inside of a cave. There was a life-sized statue of what looked like a satyr with a long face and ears. I figured that this was a picture of the Valentinos clan's cave and the statue was Lupercus. Being from a religious family, Isabella never got to visit places that were haunted. Now that she's old enough to make her own decisions, Isabella decided to do something that she'd be too scared to do as a child. I decided, why not, as the idea seemed more interesting than getting hammered at some local bar. Apart from me, Isabella's bachelorette party included Gina, Amy, and Caroline. Unlike me, they'd rather drink than explore some cave. Isabella promised to take the girls to a bar after the cave. With that, the 5 of us went to the allegedly haunted cave. The entrance was at the base of a hill near Palatine Hill. Inside, there was a downward slope with symbols painted on the walls. My friends and I walked down the slope with our phones' flashlights to guide us. Finally, we arrived at the cavern. Floor candlestick holders lined the walls of the underground room. The candles that occupied them had been burned down to stumps. A large fire pit stood near the Lupercus statue. Isabella talked about how beautiful the cave was while taking pictures when Caroline picked up a goat skull. "Looks like someone came down here for a Halloween party," Caroline commented. Isabella saw what her friend was holding and told her that the skull was not a decoration. Caroline dropped the skull as she gagged in disgust. We were laughing at her reaction when I spotted something. There was a faint glow coming from a tunnel. As I got closer, I could hear something. I tried to analyze it when Isabella asked me where I was going. I pointed at the tunnel and asked Isabella if she heard what I was hearing. She confirmed, saying that it sounded like the cries of animals and humans. We gathered the others before heading through the tunnel. As we ventured through the tunnel, the sounds became increasingly clear. Isabella was right about what they sounded like, but that wasn't all. Based on what I heard, the animals were just goats and dogs. That, and the human cries weren't family friendly, if you catch my drift. Isabella and I were looking at each other like, what the hell? Meanwhile, our friends were snickering like schoolgirls. I was thinking about getting out of there when we reached the end of the tunnel. What we found in this massive chamber made me regret not turning away when I had the chance. Bloody dogs and skinless goats howled with pain, but that's not the worst of it. Charred bodies moaned as they did their 18+ activities. I was so mortified that I didn't know whether to scream or vomit. I looked at my friends, who shared the same feeling. I don't know how long we've been standing there, but our silence broke when Amy hurled. All the corpses simultaneously stopped what they were doing and looked at us. They then slowly moved towards us like zombies, resuming their lewd noises. The 5 of us screamed as we booked it out of the cave. We stopped just outside the cave's entrance when I mustered up the courage to look behind us. I didn't see or hear those things. We went back to our hotel, trying to process what had just happened. I swear that we were 100% sober when this happened. We never told anyone what we saw that night. We told everyone that we just went to a bar and that's it. That's half true since we did go to a bar afterward. I learned the hard way that there are ghosts in this world. Since then, I'd never set foot in a haunted place again. Have you ever been to the Globe Theatre? The Lord Chamberlain's men built it in 1599. However, in 1613, the theater burned down during a performance of Henry VIII. It was rebuilt a year later. Being a lifelong fan of Shakespeare, I have dreamed of visiting the Globe Theatre. So when my best friend Molly invited me on a trip to London, I eagerly accepted as my dream was about to come true. But never would I have anticipated things to go down the way they did. Molly and I were on our plane to London when we discussed our plans. Molly agreed to go with me when I said I wanted to visit the Globe Theatre. However, she said that we wouldn't be there by normal means. Instead, we were going to go to the theater at night. Molly was the typical rules are made to be broken kind of person. I asked why she wanted to do that. In response, Molly told me of a legend surrounding the Globe Theatre. In the early 1600s, 2 friends named Baldwin and Hugh wanted to become actors. When the Globe Theatre opened, the duo vowed to do everything they could to land a part in at least one of the theater's plays. In 1613, Baldwin and Hugh hoped for the lead role of Henry VIII. Baldwin earned the lead role, but Hugh couldn't get one. On the surface, Hugh was happy for his friend, but deep down, he was furious. In a fit of jealousy, Hugh turned to the dark arts. He placed a curse on the theater that would not only ruin the play, but stop anyone from going there again. So, on the night of the play, a cannon suddenly went off, thus starting the fire. Baldwin and his fellow actors died as the flames trapped them on the stage. Hugh went into hiding after that, never to be seen again. Then, when the Globe Theatre was rebuilt, strange things started happening at night. It was believed that every night, the spirits of the lost actors reenacted the play they couldn't finish all those years ago. I rolled my eyes, telling Molly that there's no such thing as ghosts. She responded by placing a bet. If I was right and there were no ghosts, I would get $100 from Molly. And if there are spirits in the Globe Theatre, I would give her $100. Confident in my beliefs, I accepted. Molly and I broke into the Globe Theatre on our first night in London. To our surprise, the front doors weren't locked. I figured that someone from security had forgotten and didn't think much of it. We started by exploring the museum part of the Globe Theatre. I walked past the exhibits, admiring the beautiful costumes donned on the mannequins. At some point, I realized that Molly wasn't with me. I quietly called Molly's name as I walked around the room. I stopped at some point to look around when a hand suddenly grabbed me from behind. I nearly jumped out of my skin as I screamed. Only when I quieted down could I hear laughter as the hand released me. I turned around and saw Molly emerging from behind a curtain. I scolded Molly, telling her to keep quiet unless she wanted us to get caught. Molly said that there were no guards or security in the theater. She then turned on her phone's flashlight and shined it around the ceiling. "See? No cameras," Molly said. I was perplexed. Why was the Globe Theater left unprotected like this? Molly suggested jokingly that Baldwin must have scared all the criminals away. Our private tour eventually brought us to the stage. I looked around in awe at the outdoor theater. I almost felt as if I'd gone back in time. Molly got on the stage and told me to do the same. As I did so, the air suddenly felt denser. Molly noticed my reaction and asked if I was okay. I explained that the air somehow felt different. "Now that you mention it, it does feel colder all of a sudden," Molly admitted. No breeze would have hit us, seeing as walls surrounded us. I was about to get off the stage when something caught my eye. A dark figure was moving in the middle gallery. I got scared, thinking that it was someone coming to bust us. I warned Molly as our fellow intruder disappeared into the building through the closest doors. Out of fear, Molly booked it back inside before I could react. I was about to follow her when a wretched smell caught my attention. It took a couple of seconds for me to realize that it was smoke. Flames then appeared on the seats out of nowhere before gradually spreading throughout the entire structure. A fire trail then surrounded me, outlining the stage as it trapped me there. The area became so hot that I was drenched in sweat. Burning figures began to approach me from opposite sides of the stage. They acted so calmly, as if they couldn't feel their flesh burning. I then heard a hoarse voice from behind me. I slowly turned around and saw another one of those things. He was saying something to me, but with his voice combined with my overwhelming fear, I couldn't understand a word this monster said. I don't remember what happened after that. I woke up in the hospital, where 2 officers greeted me. They told me that I was found lying unconscious on the stage in the Globe Theater. I asked the officers what happened and how I got to the hospital. The officers gave me a grim look before telling me everything. It turned out that what Molly said about the Globe Theater was true. The curse, the ghosts, everything. The authorities figured it out after the theater's grand reopening. Every morning, those who worked security in the Globe Theater the night prior were found either burned to a crisp or unconscious. When the police examined the crime scene, they couldn't determine how the fire started. Even stranger was that there were no signs of burn damage anywhere in the theater. When the unconscious employees came to, they started rambling about burning spirits haunting the Globe Theater. Back then, everyone believed that demons invaded the theater. When the king learned about the strange occurrences, he'd sent a priest to bless the Globe Theater. The priest approached the king the following day. The priest confirmed that the spirits were the cast who died in the fire. He was in the middle of blessing the Globe Theater when Baldwin's ghost appeared before him. The spirit told the priest his story and how the curse killed anyone who entered the Globe Theater at night. The church tried everything in its power to help the souls cross over. Sadly, Hugh's curse was too strong to break. Since that day, London's police have surveyed the Globe Theater every night in case the ghosts claimed any more victims. I was able to get out alive. Molly, however, wasn't so lucky. Her charred remains were brought to the morgue before I woke up. I returned to America with my best friend's ashes. I haven't looked at Shakespeare or his work the same way since that night. Don't get me wrong, I still love the bard's plays and poems, but every time I watch a play, I see Baldwin standing on the stage. It wasn't until a few days after the incident that I realized what Baldwin said that night. He was reciting his character's final lines. I hope Hugh is burning in hell for what he'd done to the Globe Theater. Because of him, Baldwin is trapped in an endless cycle of what could have been his most outstanding achievement. I was 15 when I started pickpocketing. Back then, I was pretty lazy, and my parents refused to give me money unless I did some chores. I'd considered pickpocketing when my friend Mikey told me about it. He was an underachiever like me, which is why we're friends to begin with. We talked about the easiest ways to earn money when Mikey suggested pickpocketing. He did come up with other things, all immoral of course, and out of all of them, pickpocketing seemed to be the easiest. For half of my life, I've been picking pockets. After graduating from school, I did get a job, but only because I wasn't getting enough money from stolen wallets. In all my years, I was never caught. There were a few close calls when I was still in school, but thanks to my reputation, nobody would believe that the underachieving kid would make an effort to steal something flawlessly. I thought I was going to pickpocket until my golden years. But something happened that changed everything in ways I never would have anticipated. I'd returned home after another day of collecting wallets. I was going through my loot when I noticed something strange in one of the wallets. Each dollar had something written on it in pencil. It was barely visible and appeared to be in a foreign language. Out of curiosity, I looked at the driver's license. It was some guy from another state. I was surprised when I found $500 in the guy's wallet. I concluded that this guy was loaded. He also had the foreign word embroidered in his wallet. I decided to forget about it as I doubted it had any significance. That night, I was asleep when I felt something on my back. I like to sleep on my stomach with my head facing left. Being tired, I thought that I was dreaming. But when whatever was touching me started scratching harder, I immediately sat up and turned on the bedside table. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I then went to the bathroom to check my back. There was no damage to my shirt or back. I sighed and returned to bed, sure that it was all in my head. The following day, I erased the writings from the rich guy's money. I keep the wallets I'd stolen in a box in my attic. I'd kept the box buried under all of my holiday decorations. I live alone and do my own decorating, so I never have to worry about someone finding my stash. I bought a pack of smokes with the rich guy's money when I heard someone whisper behind me. I turned around and asked the customer behind me if he had said something. Confused, he denied, saying he was texting someone. Like the previous night, I decided to forget about it and went on with my day. Night came again, as did sleep, and I'd already forgotten about the whisper. But then I felt something on my back again. This time, I felt a stinging pain in my back. I turned on the lamp, and sure enough, I saw nothing. When I checked myself in the mirror again, I saw something that scared me. A long slit was on my nightshirt. I took off my shirt and saw a scratch on my back that matched the slit. It wasn't severe enough to require medical attention. Whatever did this only broke skin like a paper cut. After disinfecting the scratch, I went back to bed. A week passed and Mikey's birthday was coming up. Around this time, the Mortal Kombat movie had just been released. Since he's a huge fan of the franchise, I decided to buy tickets for him. We were watching the film when I heard someone whispering again. This time, it was a little more audible. I asked Mikey if he said something, which he denied. I would have shrugged it off as part of the movie's soundtrack had it not happened before. When I returned home, I tried to recall what I'd heard. It took a while for me to realize that the whisper said, "Return what you stole." The more I thought about it, it occurred to me that this all began with that damn wallet. The first thing I did was look up the wallet's owner. However, his name was so common that I couldn't find him on social media. So my next step was to find out what the word embroidered in his wallet meant. When I looked it up, Google's translator popped up. The word turned out to be Latin for protect. After putting 2 and 2 together, it hit me that there's some kind of protection spell on this wallet. I'm a superstitious person, so this was the first thing that came to mind. Terrified, I decided to take the wallet to the police station first thing in the morning. But before I could do that, I had to replace the money down to the exact value of each bill. For all I knew, the owner remembered what was in his wallet, and I'd be both cursed and in jail. I went to sleep that night, relieved that this would finally end. But I had one more nasty surprise waiting for me on the third night. I was jolted awake by a sharp pain in my back. It felt like small knives puncturing me between my shoulders. I couldn't get up as something was holding me down. I opened my eyes and saw something horrendous. An inhuman creature with glowing red eyes glared at me. It growled at me, telling me to return what I stole. I froze as I realized that this was the thing that's been haunting me. I apologized to the monster, promising to return the wallet. It stared at me a little more before letting me go and disappearing into nothingness. Never had I been so thankful to have my own first aid kit. I don't know how I would have explained my injuries to the doctor without sounding crazy. Anyway, I took the wallet to the police station, claiming that I found it in a gender-inclusive bathroom. Luckily, the police believed me. The thing that tormented me never returned. After that nightmare, I vowed to never pickpocket again. I posted my experience on the internet anonymously. I hope that those who find this learn from my mistake and never go down the same path. I never saw or heard from the wallet's owner. If I did, I'd thank him for showing me the error of my ways. When the flower shop I worked in was closing down, I desperately looked for another job. I found an open position at a flower farm, as luck would have it. When I called the flower farm, they arranged an interview for me. I won't bore you with the details, so I'm going to skip to after I got the job. Due to the flower farm's location, I had to move to the countryside. The house I moved to was smaller than my original home, but the beautiful environment and clean air made it all worth it. By the time I'd settled in, I had a couple of days before my first day on the job. I went for a walk one morning as the weather was pleasant. Behind my house was a vast clearing. I decided to walk in a straight line from my house to avoid getting lost. I didn't expect to find anything, save for a few animals and trees. About 5 minutes into my walk, I spotted something from a distance. As I got closer, I realized that it was a playhouse. Based on its condition, I could tell that it was abandoned a long time ago. As I examined the playhouse further, I noticed other peculiarities. The first was the size of the playhouse. The dimensions were twice the size of a normal one. I would know because I had a playhouse when I was a kid. I also saw that the door and windows were boarded up from the outside. Above the door was a sign that read, Zoey's Playhouse. I concluded that Zoey was the kid who owned this playhouse. What I couldn't understand was what the playhouse was doing there, or, more importantly, why it was boarded up. Since there were no cries for help or smell of rotten meat coming from the playhouse, I thought to leave it be. One day, I was on my break with another employee when I mentioned the playhouse. It turned out that my coworker knew Zoey and her family. About 17 years ago, a family moved into my neighborhood. The family consisted of Zoey, her parents, and her older sister, Jasmine. Zoey's family was once very wealthy, but when the mother's company suddenly went under, they had to move somewhere cheaper. Zoey's playhouse was one of the few things the family had left from their old life. Zoey was spoiled and didn't adapt to her new life. My coworker learned from the parents that they kept the playhouse because it was Zoey's most cherished possession. They thought that by keeping this one thing, Zoey would be content with everything. Sadly, that was not the case. Every day, Zoey complained about the new living situation. The worst of it was how she blamed her mother for everything. Zoey would scream at her mother, accusing her of laziness and not handling her business correctly. She was never punished for her cruelty, as the family believed that it would only make things worse. This went on for days, until the house was finally quiet. The neighbors thought that Zoey had finally calmed down and accepted everything as it was. But then they learned that Zoey was missing. When the police looked into it, they deduced that Zoey had run away. They never found her. Time passed, and Zoey's family managed to get back on their feet. They weren't rich, but they were able to move somewhere better. By then, Zoey was declared dead and was never seen again. I felt sorry for the family. This story explained everything except for one. I'd understand if abandoning the playhouse was the family's attempt to heal from the tragedy, but why blockade it from the outside? My coworker and I couldn't think of a single reason. My coworker told me that he had a crowbar and offered to help solve this mystery. When I saw the boarded-up playhouse, I figured that there was nothing inside except maybe a child-sized dining set or something. But after hearing that story, I had to investigate. For all I knew, there could have been a clue as to what happened to Zoey. The flower farm closed, and my coworker and I drove to his house to retrieve his crowbar. By then, it was dark out, so we had to grab a couple of flashlights too. My coworker and I then parked at my place, and I led him to the playhouse. He was examining the playhouse when we heard a soft voice. My coworker and I froze. We listened quietly, wondering if it was our imagination. When we heard it again, it dawned on us that it was a small child. I shined my flashlight through the window and looked through one of the gaps. Inside was a little girl. She was sitting on her knees, sobbing while facing away from me. Her dress was bloody, and she was covered in bruises. Mortified, I urged my coworker to get the door open. Only when he started prying did the girl turn to me. I gasped when I saw her face. She looked pale and badly beaten. I would have pried those boards off with my bare hands had I not witnessed what the girl did next. She got up, the sound of bones breaking enacted from her joints. Her limbs began to stretch as she crawled towards me. I recoiled as her arm reached out through the window. My coworker dropped his crowbar in fear when he saw what was happening. We retreated to my house and stayed inside until morning. We talked amongst each other about what happened and developed a theory. After days of enduring Zoey's tantrums, her family finally snapped and killed her. They then stashed her body somewhere and kept it there until after the police investigation. When they finished searching her house, the family took the playhouse to the clearing, threw Zoey's body in there, and boarded it up. That thing we saw must have been her. Only then did I understand why the playhouse was boarded up. I hope that nobody ever goes near that cursed playhouse again. My hometown had this amusement park called Big Cyrus World. It was founded in 1946 by a man named Howard Madden. The park was inspired by his imaginary friend, Big Cyrus. When he was little, his parents would take him to amusement parks in the summertime. However, his parents were too busy with their work to pay attention to him on other days. Howard became so lonely that he eventually invented Big Cyrus. Big Cyrus was a chunky, fuzzy humanoid with green and purple stripes, curly horns, and a pig snout. Whenever he played with his imaginary friend, Young Howard pretended that they were in an amusement park. When he was of age, Howard decided to save up to make his amusement park based on Big Cyrus. After years of hard work, he finally made his wish come true. For years, Big Cyrus World brought joy to my town. It became so popular that people from all over the tri-state area came to visit. With such an excellent reputation, you'd think that Big Cyrus World would last forever, but something happened that caused everything to fall apart. Since the park's grand opening, strange things began happening. It started with little things, like power outages in some attractions. Thankfully, nothing resulted in injuries or death. These things could have quickly been passed as technical difficulties had things not gotten creepier. For example, security guards had reported seeing black silhouettes on the CCTV footage. When they appeared, the attractions they were at suddenly malfunctioned. There were also times when the intercom suddenly turned on and a raspy voice was heard speaking in an unknown language. Back then, everyone in my hometown believed that the Soviet Union was behind the strange events. This was during the Cold War, so it was the first thing that came to everyone's minds. The problem was that everyone blamed everything that went wrong on the USSR. For example, my grandpa was walking by a neighbor's house while the said neighbor was trying to start his lawnmower. He then got mad, stomped on the lawnmower, and yelled something about Stalin messing with our technology. Whenever my grandpa told this story, he reenacted the entire scene he witnessed. I still laugh every time I think about the neighbor who blamed Stalin for his broken lawnmower. The final straw happened in 1971, when Howard was found dead in his office. According to the police, Howard looked as if he were attacked by a wild animal. This theory was immediately ruled out for a few reasons. For starters, there was a tall fence surrounding the park. Second, the office was locked from the inside. All the police found was a handwritten note on Howard's desk. It demanded that Big Cyrus World be shut down and never opened again. Forensics confirmed that Howard wrote the note. Big Cyrus World was Howard's dream, one that he worked so hard to make come true. Nobody could understand why he'd want the park shut down. Regardless, the law decided to fulfill Howard's final wish. Rumors began to spread about Howard's motives to close Big Cyrus World. The most popular one was that his killer forced him to write the note. The killer was believed to be a disgruntled ex-employee who Howard fired himself. Howard's murder was never solved, and Big Cyrus World was abandoned forever. My story began about 50 years after the amusement park's closing. I had a friend named Jessica who loved exploring abandoned places and recording her adventures for YouTube. One day, she called me to ask a favor. Since the 50th anniversary of Big Cyrus World's closure was approaching, Jessica decided to explore there next. The problem was that the park's entrance was an iron gate sealed with chains and a lock, and the walls were too high for Jessica to scale. I happened to own a pair of bolt cutters, so Jessica asked me to unlock the gate for her. For the record, I never condoned Jessica's hobby. No matter how many times I told her to stop, she continued trespassing in abandoned places. I told Jessica that I wanted no part of her adventure. She said that she just needed to borrow my bolt cutters and nothing more. I sighed, then told her to come over and retrieve them. But to my dismay, Jessica was already at the park and asked me to bring them to her. I clenched my fist, as I knew that Jessica wouldn't stop bothering me until I did what she asked. I told Jessica that I'd bring the bolt cutters to her. It was already dusk, and I met Jessica at the gate. I'd just cut the chains when I noticed something through the bars. I saw a silhouette of someone standing in the park. When I told Jessica, the shape suddenly shifted away from my sight. And I mean shifted, as in whoever that was moved while staying perfectly still. I was terrified, but Jessica was excited. When she entered the amusement park, I'd put my bolt cutters back in my car before going after her. I feared that whoever I saw in the park could hurt Jessica or worse. I planned to keep Jessica safe until we were out of Big Cyrus World. The paved floor was weathered and cracked. The rides were paved with rust and entangled in overgrown vegetation. I tried to stay out of the camera's way as Jessica recorded for her video. The last thing I wanted was to be falsely labeled as an accomplice. Finally, our journey brought us to the office building where Howard Madden himself worked. This building partially served as security, where the guards could watch CCTV footage and make announcements on the intercom. It was also where the Big Cyrus costume was kept after hours. Jessica and I were surprised to see that the glass door was smashed, as if someone had broken in. I grabbed Jessica's arm, telling her we had to leave. Jessica suggested that the door could have been broken before we got there. I wasn't entirely convinced that she was right, but I still went with her. The office building was full of dust and cobwebs. Jessica said that the Big Cyrus costume was kept somewhere on the ground level. She made sure her camera showed everything to her potential audience as we looked for the outfit. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but notice how cold it was in that building. It was the middle of summer, so it was pretty warm outside. Plus, the building's been abandoned, so it couldn't have been air conditioning. Yet somehow, Jessica didn't seem to notice. We arrived at the locker room where the costume was kept. The door was closed, but it wasn't locked. There was a large locker with the door slightly ajar. On the door was a piece of tape with the words Big Cyrus written on it. "This is it, viewers," Jessica said as her camera was aimed at the locker. "The resting place of the famous Big Cyrus." I wanted to tell Jessica that the costume may not be there, but I kept quiet as I didn't want to start a fight by interrupting her video. Jessica opened the locker and, to my surprise, the Big Cyrus costume was there. Jessica became giddy with excitement. While she continued talking, I thought I'd heard something from the hallway. My heart raced as I thought it was the police. I took a peek outside to be sure, but saw something else. It was a dark figure, presumably the same one I saw earlier. The shadow started running towards me, and I slammed the door shut. Jessica started yelling at me for ruining her video. I interrupted her, saying that there was someone in the hall. Jessica fell silent before asking if it was the police. I told her that I didn't know, then listened for the person outside. After a minute of silence, I slowly opened the door. Not all the way, just enough to peek through the crack. The figure was gone, but this only amplified my fear. The building was massive, meaning that whoever I saw could be anywhere. I turned to Jessica and could tell by her expression that we were thinking the same thing. We had to get out of this amusement park. I was faster than Jessica, so I got out of the building first. I stopped in front of the entrance, waiting for Jessica to come out. When she didn't, I began to worry and ran back in. I traveled the same path to the locker room. Before I knew it, I was already there. I looked around and saw that the Big Cyrus costume was gone. I then noticed that Jessica's camera was on the ground. I was about to pick it up when I noticed something about the locker. There were no hooks to hang up the costume. I was sure that the costume was standing upward as if it were hung up on something. My thoughts were interrupted by Jessica screaming. I bolted out of the locker room and saw something in the hallway adjacent to the one I'd just gone down. I didn't know whether to be scared or confused by what I saw. Big Cyrus, or rather the costume, was standing in the hallway. I thought it was Jessica trying to scare me. I told her off for pulling this stupid prank. As I continued to scold her, I saw the costume's mouth open. The smile revealed razor-sharp teeth, and a long tongue slithered out. Claws grew out of Big Cyrus's fingers and toes as he let out a deep growl. I stood there, stunned by what I was witnessing. The abomination roared, snapping me out of my trance. I ran out of the office building and towards the gates. As I hurried out of that hell, more of those silhouettes began appearing around me. Their arms reached out to me as they stood in place. Thank goodness I left the gate open. I escaped Big Cyrus World and got into my car. Before driving off, I took one last look at the amusement park. Big Cyrus and those dark apparitions stood at the gates. I never saw Jessica again. Her parents reported her missing the following day. When the police queried for Jessica's whereabouts, I told them fragments of the truth. I told the police that Jessica had informed me that she was going to Big Cyrus World the day before. This didn't surprise them, as they dealt with Jessica's trespassings before. When the police searched Big Cyrus World, all they found was Jessica's camera. However, the camera was smashed to bits. I guess Jessica caught Big Cyrus on camera, and he wanted to dispose of the evidence. After that terrifying evening, I decided to do some digging. It turned out that there had been multiple reports of Big Cyrus acting strange, like staring at random people and appearing out of seemingly nowhere. From what I've witnessed, I doubt that the mascot was ever some guy in a costume. I then realized that Howard Madden's friend wasn't really imaginary. Now I understand what happened to him and why he wanted to close Big Cyrus World. I hope that Big Cyrus, or whatever that thing is, never leaves his park. In all my years as a U.S. history teacher, I've never had a student that I admire and fear at the same time. Eli was in his freshman year when he had my class. He was a quiet kid with black hair and gray eyes. I learned of Eli's intelligence after the first pop quiz of the school year. For context, none of my students ever received a 100% in my quizzes or exams. So imagine my surprise when I graded Eli's quiz. I must have checked it 5 times before realizing that all of the answers were correct. I've never been so happy in my entire career. Most of my students never took my class seriously. I guess I was just unlucky enough to have irresponsible pupils. I watched Eli grin as he looked at his grade. Days passed, and Eli got perfect scores in every assignment. I never pondered how he managed to do what other students couldn't. But one incident prompted my curiosity. During a passing period, I was on my way to class when I overheard something from around the corner. I rolled my eyes, as I recognized the voice of David, one of the school's problematic students. David was mad at Eli, demanding to know why he's such a nerd. I was about to stop David when Eli's response stopped me dead in my tracks. Eli claimed that he was a reincarnation of Benedict Arnold. David fell silent for a second before telling Eli that he was full of crap. Finally, I intervened, scolding David for using foul language. After sending David to the principal's office, I asked Eli if he was okay. He said he was fine, thanked me for helping him, and went to his next class. After school, I couldn't help but think about what Eli said. I've heard stories of smart kids saying something to screw with their bullies, but this was the most random one of all. History was never David's strong suit. Even if he did believe in reincarnation, I doubt he'd know who Eli was referring to. For those who don't know, Benedict Arnold was a major general from the Continental Army. During the American Revolution, he betrayed the colonies by joining the British. My class took an exam on the American Revolution the day David confronted Eli. I figured that inspired Eli's clapback about being a reincarnation of Benedict. As the school year continued, I noticed something about Eli's behavior. He became more reserved and didn't participate unless I asked him to. I also saw a look of resentment on his face. My initial thought was that David was bothering Eli again. So one day, I decided to talk to Eli after class. Eli explained that he'd just been dealing with some personal stuff and that David hadn't approached him in a while. As a teacher, I know a thing or two about students with complicated home lives. I've had a handful of students open up to me about quarrels with their parents, amongst other things. Of course, that only happened when the students felt ready to talk to me. Eli, however, did not. It wasn't until I was getting ready for my next class that something occurred to me. I hadn't seen David for about a week before I chatted with Eli. Later that day, I was chatting with my friend Gina in the teacher's lounge. She taught an algebra class that Eli was taking the same year. It turned out that the kid was excelling in all of his classes. While singing Eli's praises, I told Gina that I suspected David was picking on him again. Gina gave me a weird look as soon as I said his name. She asked me if I heard about what happened to David. Confused, I said no. At the time, I thought that David got suspended for bullying Eli, but what Gina said concerned me. She said that David was reported missing a week ago. David was last seen riding his bike home after school the day before he went missing. However, he never made it back to his house. It took about 15 minutes for David to get home by bike. That's about 2 hours before his parents came home. When they came home that day, David was nowhere in the house. At first, David's parents thought that he was visiting a friend. They were upset that their son went somewhere without their permission. But when he didn't answer his phone and found his bike in the garage, the couple began to worry. The first thing they did was call the parents of David's friends. To their horror, nobody knew where David could have gone. David's parents stayed home for hours, hoping that someone would find their son. They even refused to leave for work the following day. I was shocked when I heard this. I'll admit that I hadn't seen David for a while after his episode with Eli, but in my defense, I see so many students per day that it's impossible to keep track of who I have or haven't seen. And knowing David's track record, I would have assumed that he got suspended again, or even expelled. Despite his obnoxious behavior, I was worried for David. Even he didn't deserve whatever happened to him. So I followed the case, hoping that he was okay. It was around this time that I realized something about Eli. The day for parent-teacher conferences was coming, and I was looking up his parents' contact information when I noticed something off. The principal told me that Eli lived with only his dad, whom the student was named after. Therefore, I had only Eli Sr.'s contact information. The father's email address was rather odd. A typical email address consists of someone's surname, first name, and a few numbers in that order. Eli Sr.'s, however, was nothing like that. Instead, the email address had the numbers 9211780. What's even weirder was that those were the exact numbers of Eli Sr.'s phone number. I notified Eli Sr. of the conference date via email after school one day. He replied a few seconds later, saying that he'd be leaving for a business trip that day. I was dumbfounded, not by what Eli Sr. wrote, but by the immediate response to my email. It was as if the email was written in advance and sent right after reading mine. I just sat there, trying to understand why Eli Sr. would do this. When I couldn't think of anything, I decided to ask Eli about it the next time I saw him. Eli arrived in class 10 minutes before it began the following day. When I asked him about his dad, he responded in a way I hadn't anticipated. Eli said that his dad felt the conference to be pointless. According to Eli Sr., parent-teacher conferences are for students who fail to be the best. I was taken aback by Eli's holier-than-thou attitude. He'd never behaved like this before. Regardless, he was right about one thing. Eli had done so well in school that there wouldn't be anything to talk about. Plus, it's not like these conferences are mandatory. The school day ended, and I was on my way out of the school when I saw a notebook lying in the hallway. I opened it and immediately recognized the handwriting as Eli's. I could also tell by the content that this was the notebook he used to take notes for my class. But there was something on the first page that made me uneasy. The notes were about the American Revolution, but the way it was written was disturbingly negative. Eli was bad-mouthing the Continental Army, calling everyone things like ingrates and weaklings. I didn't know whether to be baffled or offended. How could Eli say such things? It was then that I decided to visit Eli's house. I wasn't going to tell him off or anything. I just wanted to understand why he wrote such nasty things. I drove up to Eli's house and saw a car parked in the driveway. I figured it was his dad's. I was approaching the front door when I noticed something. Eli's house had a basement window with something red smeared on it. As I got closer, I saw that it was blood. The window was slightly open, and I could see red splotches on the frame as well. I got down on the ground and peered through the window. There was someone tied to a chair with his mouth duct-taped. My heart sank as I realized that it was David. David was wearing nothing but his boxers and was covered in bruises and cuts. I guessed that he was unconscious because he didn't react when I said his name. I went quiet as soon as I heard the basement door open. Eli entered the basement and walked up to David. He then backhanded the captive, snapping him out of his state. Because the window was somewhat open, I was able to hear everything. "You should have stayed out of my way," Eli spoke in a dark tone. "But look on the bright side. At least you'll get to experience the Second American Revolution." David noticed me while Eli was talking to him. This got Eli's attention, and he looked in the same direction. When he turned to face me, I saw the knife in his hand. Eli then went up the stairs, and I booked it to my car before speeding off. I went over the speed limit without realizing it, and was pulled over by an officer. I told him what I'd witnessed, and gave him Eli's address. When the police arrived at Eli's house, they found David alive, but that wasn't all. A man's corpse was found in the master bedroom's closet, later identified as Eli Sr. He was stabbed in the lung with an unidentifiable blade before being dragged into the closet. The car was missing from the driveway, plus most of Eli's belongings. It was apparent that Eli fled the scene before the police could catch him. David was taken to the hospital, and the police started looking for Eli. Eli was tall for his age, so nobody would think he was too young to drive by himself. I cursed myself for not getting the license plate number. It turned out that Eli Sr. was killed after the first week of the school year. This meant that Eli was the one trying to evade parent-teacher conferences. I was taken in for questioning while David recovered in the hospital. With our combined testimonies, I was able to get an idea of Eli's story. On the day David went missing, he cornered Eli during a passing period. Like a typical bully, David ordered Eli to do his homework. Eli agreed and promised to have it done by 6 o'clock. David went home to play video games before leaving for Eli's house. Since their houses were pretty close, he decided to walk there. When Eli invited David into his house, he knocked the bully out before bringing him to the basement. David woke up later with a gash in his head. He tried to escape through the window when Eli caught him and knocked him unconscious again. This time, Eli tied him up. He tortured David while revealing his story. Eli felt that the Continental Army didn't give him the prestige he deserved when he was Benedict Arnold. Fed up with the insolence of his fellow soldiers, Benedict became a turncoat. But of course, he failed. On his deathbed, Benedict vowed to take revenge on the country that had forsaken him. When Benedict came back as Eli, he started plotting his revenge. For years, Eli hid his schemes from his dad, but then Eli Sr. discovered the truth and died at the hands of his son. The police soon found that the email address I tried to contact Eli Sr. with was Eli's. However, There was one thing about this that I couldn't understand. What did Eli mean when he told David that he'd get to experience the American Revolution? David never learned anything of Eli's plan or what he meant either. It's been several months and the police still haven't found Eli. I keep a bat under my bed in case that lunatic comes after me next. I'm still not entirely convinced that Eli was a reincarnation of Benedict Arnold. It could explain how he knew the American Revolution so well, but on the other hand, he could have just been that good a student. I often wonder what Eli's American Revolution would be. Whatever it is, I doubt that any good would come out of it.